7:04, not too bad, of the Planning Board on September 10th. Welcome, everyone. The first item that we have is a pre-application for a project at 6 Station Street, a joint meeting with the HDIC, so thank you for them to come as well. As this is a pre-application, we're just getting a sense from the proponent in advance of an application on what the project is and what they're thinking. We may have some questions for them. It's not an opportunity for public comment here. There will be lots of opportunity for that as we go forward should an application be filed. We will address all kinds of details going forward relative to design and traffic and all kinds of other things. I think the goal here is to give the potential proponent some guidance from us and from the HDIC. We're going to schedule 45 minutes for this, and then we will adjourn briefly to reposition ourselves and get on with the rest of our agendas. Bill, you're going to be recused from this conversation.
Yes, I'm a direct abutter, so I'm going to
turn yourself around, as they say. Ted Matthews, should there be an A3 on this project, will sit on that, so he's going to join us for this discussion. Mike Cransley is here. We're not going to take any formal action on this. I will say that comparisons are sometimes inevitable, but particularly when we had a project fairly recently on this project. But I would encourage all of us to look at this project on its own and on its merits and not in comparison to anything else that we may have been talking about recently. I think I will say also that, and this is hopefully the last time I'll reference the previous project, that in that case there was lots of opportunity for public comment at lots of boards, not least of which this one. So that will all be available for folks and for the public. We all welcome that feedback when the time comes, should an application be filed. So with that, unless anybody has anything else to add, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, Mr. Henderson.
I'm Richard Henderson from Henderson & Henderson & Cohasset. I'm representing Matt Falconari, who is the developer, and with him is his architect, Sevi Strekalowski from Strekalowski Architecture, and John Cavanaro from Cavanaro Consulting in Norwell. John's the project engineer. By way of introduction, I'm going to be very brief and let Sevi talk about the building, but this is a 6 Station Street project. The ultimate objective is to raise the existing structure and to replace it with a mixed-use project, which would consist of a building with 2 retail or commercial units on North Street and Station Street, and 4 apartments on the 2nd and 3rd floors, underground or ground-level parking interior on Station Street for 7 cars, with additional 5 spaces on Station Street on a lot adjacent to the street. One of the parking spaces to be assigned to the residential requirement, and the other for visitors. The structure, as Sevi will explain and describe, I think will fit very nicely into what is kind of an eclectic historic district on North Street. It is a wood frame building, clapboard with shingles, and we'll get into more detail about that. But the building, not to mention the prior project, but the building is smaller than the prior project. It occupies much less of the site than the prior project. Its sight lines are much better both on North and Station Streets. And it's set back from Station Street, which the prior project was not, which leaves enough space for both parking and some green space at the rear of the building along Station Street. In addition to seeking help and relief from this board, we'll also, of course, have to go to the Historic District Commission and maybe the Zoning Board. I haven't concluded whether that's necessary at this point. But rather than going on about the building, I'll let Sevi speak now and get into details about the structure itself and answer questions afterwards. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
How would you like me to do this? Bring the board over and face you, or I think the audience? Help you. Take the mic up here.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
He can hear you, we can hear you.
He can hear. Good evening. Sevi Strekalowski Architecture. What we have attempted to do at Station Street and North Street is to create a building that provides uses that downtown Hingham needs very much. It needs retail frontage of the right sort, residential occupancy of the right sort, and a site plan that fits the site. This is an unusual site on a corner with some sightline issues, but it's a vital part of the continuity of the downtown area to the harbor, and this is something that's been a goal of the Industrial Commission, of the Planning Board, in creating the overlay district. So we think that what we're presenting is in keeping with the mission of the town in trying to create this continuity and increase vitality in the downtown. So what you've got, what you're looking at is a 3D rendering of the actual setting in photographs, and then the building inserted into it at the corner of Station and North. And this is the street level view. This is a view, an earlier view, the same building, not computer, and from Bill Ramsey's lot. So you get a feeling of what the building looks like looking down on it and at the adjacent buildings. This is Judge Ramsey's fence. And it just, the elevation changes the perspective. What you can see is an attempt to relate the building to the scale and the character of the quite funky, varied buildings on North Street. We're looking to North Street as the context, not other buildings in town. And there are buildings that are similar in height and scale, and actually the scale of this element, which is the larger scale of the building, is somewhat narrower than the red building next door. The third level is set back on the roof and pedimented, so it's not part of a bulky height of a building that would be 3 stories brought out to the street. The key in the scaling of the building to the context adjacent is that the eave line continues pretty much the same eave line of the building adjacent, and that's what, as you come down the street, you will read that alignment. So that's a key a key component in the massing. So we feel that in terms of Historic District Commission's appropriateness, the building is appropriateness to the neighborhood context, and that the massing of the building is broken up and is not overwhelming to any of the buildings adjacent or down the street. These are elevations. It's a building that really has no rear, and the elevations are such that it's all relating to each side of the street. We have garages on the lower level. This is the lower level plan. I don't know who can not see, but so we're parking within the building. Here, this is the site plan with showing the lower level, and then these are the 5 spaces all on site. And we're set back about 20 feet from the edge of the street, so it's quite a different proposal in terms of following the street line and breaking the building, creating a little pedestrian areas. So it's a continuation of the character of the pedestrian, the more successful pedestrian parts of the Hingham downtown plan. The elevations, this being the front elevation, show that width of the building, which is less as it projects than the, I think it's 44 North Street, the red building next door. Awnings, a variety of window placement. This is the key line of the eave that picks up the eave line of the adjacent buildings, and this you can see from the end elevation. Now the what we'll call rear of the building is really also an entrance for the residential units, and there'll be attractive garage doors with lights over them, so it'll have a feel that definitely won't be the back end of a building. And the end elevation that is facing the intersection will have retail frontage, and you can see that the roof line is really that of a 2.5-story building. So we tried to break it down, vary the roof heights. The pitches of the roofs are consistent with, they are 9 and 12 pitch. We started with a 12 and 12 pitch. We tried to bring the building down, but keep it in character of the adjacent buildings. If you go any less, it begins to look chunky and not fit in. Also, I should point out that the ridge, the highest point, is set far back on the from North Street. So from a North Street standpoint, adjacent buildings have ridges that some are lower, some are the same, but they are closer to North Street. So there is an impact, and we'll have a model. We'll have 3D renderings from the backside, so you'll get a more complete picture as we go through the permitting process.
Thank you, Steve. Do we want to hear from John, or do you want to go straight to questions? Are you, no? Okay. Thank you very much. I'll open it up for questions from the commission and the board. I have a couple to start with, though. Just so I don't have to do the math in my head, because who knows where that will go. What's the total square footage?
Including the ground space, which
Yes.
interior parking lot is 13,000 square feet. So it's basically interior parking, first floor, second floor, and third floor. Cumulatively are 13,000 square feet. Approximately.
And all the retail parking will be in the surface lots in back?
Yes.
You're not using any parking lot?
No, they'll be in the Station Street public parking lot.
Oh, they will, okay.
Yes.
So so you have garage parking and 5 spaces outside, right? And those are all for the residents?
Can you hear him? Or no? Could you
Oh, you're gonna-
could you come over
Oh, sorry.
for the people at home?
It's a matter of zoning law. One of the spaces has to be assigned because there's only 7 underground, so we need 8 for the residences. The other spaces could be for visitors, but they certainly could be used for customers of the stores as well.
But you're anticipating the customer parking to be in the lot?
We do at this point, yes. Station.
Right, I'm sorry, yes, that's
station
what
lot, yes.
yes, in the Station Street lot was what I was intending to. And so that will be sidewalk all the way around from North Street to Station Street? Sidewalk all the way around?
Sidewalk all the way around. The sidewalk will be continuous and pick up the pedestrian crosswalk, sitting area at that point, but it'll be a very pedestrian-friendly approach to the building and spaces at the building.
Just,
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
yeah. So I do see there's some open space that comes around the building towards the back where the parking would be.
Right.
And I see a delineation of sidewalk. Is there, the elevation, is that right on the Station Street level?
There's about a 4.5 foot difference from Station Street.
See.
We're proposing dropping the garages about a foot so we can get this grade so that it's acceptable to park on and then come into the building, and there'll be a ramp to get to the elevator, so it's all accessible. But we're going to build up from Station Street at an acceptable slope.
Yes, sir.
Can I expand
Yes.
on that question?
Sure.
Absolutely. Yes.
So the parking spaces that you have for visitors, that you're assuming that those are going to be on street level?
Sir,
On street
The
level.
5 parking spaces?
Yes.
They will be on
Well,
Station
yes.
Street level?
You're allowed a 4% slope
Right.
okay.
But-
But yes, they'll be at Station Street, so you come in, there'll be no retaining wall, there'll be no change of grade. Station Street is rising here, so we're coming in, unlike the previous scheme, which was approached further down the slope. We're up the slope a little bit, but this two-way access will be on grade, and on grade right to the building, to that.
And one last question. on
Garage.
that. The sidewalk, you'd estimate to be, how wide would the sidewalk be on the Station Street side?
About 5 feet.
5 feet, okay. Thank you.
No problem. So I'm sure there's a lot more information that we're going to be getting. Do me a favor, Sebi, just put the rendering right to your left up for me, would you? Get back to the elevations. And again, renderings from Station Street I think will be extraordinarily helpful.
Yes.
Down the road as well. 'Cause
Right.
I think that's kind of a key point.
Mm-hmm.
It's awkward, and maybe it's just how we're looking. On the right, the new building looks much closer to North Street than it does on the left, if you know what I mean, right? The left seems to have it set back a bit from the red house next door and seem.
Well-
but maybe it's just the angle, and we'll
No,
we'll see more, but-
that's right. That's
Maybe, I just,
That's an artist's conception, a little more than, this is laid out,
an excellent
we're allowed the continuation of the adjacent buildings. There's a
Yeah.
zero setback. So we actually are set back a little bit because the building is stepping as the street
as you said, yeah.
starts the corner, so that helps the scale, but it is parallel to the building next door.
It is,
But
but it is parallel to the
yeah,
one next door.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's right on the street line.
That's fine, yeah. So there's lots more to come, but I will open it up to other questions from both the commission and the HDIC.
So, I know we're just giving you reactions and feedback, so I'll just start by saying, I think this looks like a fabulous start. I think this is, a good scale, hopefully, for this spot. I know that I speak for everyone in the town, that everyone is excited about an opportunity to have this parcel developed. I also, on some of the specifics, I would ask if, and you don't even need to answer now, but I'm giving you my reactions and feedback. We definitely want information on if there'll be any changes to North Street, any proposed changes to North Street in the front with the parking spaces. I know that's been considered before. Also, sightlines, as you know, this is a tricky parcel. I mean, the buses go down Station Street. It's a well-traveled area. It's by people and cars tend to go fast. It's a funny, just the the geography and the topography, it's tricky. So if and when you come back with a pre-application, it looks like you're thinking about this already, but make sure you address the sight lines in advance so that we have something to evaluate.
Right.
It looks like with the 5 spaces along Station Street, you're not proposing much in the way of visual obstacles, but, we just want to be very specific about that going forward. And I would also say it looks like there's a bit of green space being proposed. We're always a fan of as much green space downtown as possible, so that's great to see and hopefully would stay in any actual application put forth.
Love our trees.
I do love our trees. I think that's all I have for now. I feel very positive about this application. I think the awnings and the architecture and the scale and the massing and the roof lines, I never have the right words. I'm not the resident architect on the board, but it just looks like a building, as you said, that would be in downtown Hingham. So
Thanks.
I commend you for that.
Thank you. Let me just say the sight lines we feel are excellent from the egress that you can see right to the intersection.
Right.
I know there's a concern with buses, which I've dealt with many times, and you need that warning as they come around the corner. But this is all very open. And the kind of green space, we want to get trees that actually the trees between these two buildings do quite a bit, but this would be a huge benefit. But then there's an appropriate kind of village green space, pedestrian space. It doesn't have to be very big. It's just linking the postage stamp parks, all the way to the harbor.
Questions?
I'm actually Bill's next door neighbor and also in a butter, so I'll
Okay.
recuse myself at this time. That's my front yard right there.
I don't have any additional questions, but I would agree with the prior comments. This looks like a great start, and it kind of checks the boxes that we're looking at the HDIC to try to figure out a way to get people to cross that street and head down to the harbor, and to have an attractive building with the type of building articulation that you've done in this. That I think it's a great start, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. Thank you.
It seems to connect the rest of North Street towards the harbor and across the street on North Street very well. I would agree with everything that was said, and I think that the step back design helps from a scale perspective a great deal as well, and we're all eager to see something happen on that site. The green space is on the inside right now at that site, so it'll be good when that gets done. Ted, you have any other?
I really am just interested in the parking piece. Sounds like you've put some forethought into that, which is great. And, I think that the town would be very excited to have something that is in keeping with the neighborhood. And seeing these sight lines kind of from a 30,000 foot view at this point it looks great, and then hopefully you guys will get into the detail.
Yeah, we'll have a traffic report.
Yeah.
We have a model that was
Microphone, Sevy.
the model will help you really get down there and look at how this all comes together. But we feel that the texture of it is right within that of the rest of North Street, which has a lot of variety, but there's a certain scale, and we want to continue that. But we know that's been a goal of the HDIC, to make that connection. What's going on down at the harbor deserves that continuity.
Of course.
The only other thing I'll add, and I'm sure you're already thinking of it, is that we have a lot of neighbors, obviously, in this spot, both residential and commercial, and, this impacts some people's businesses, some people's homes, light, shadows, air, parking, all of the things. So if you're not already, I'm sure you are, I would encourage you certainly to meet with all of the different groups down there, and, convey your plans and hopefully allay some of their concerns.
We started to meet, but we think that this is such a needed component of it, to have the right kind of residential. These are going to be very nice units with enclosed parking, the right kind of retail, and that can only strengthen the retail. Now, I mean, already there are people leaving that piece, and I think that it's really going to anchor things and help a lot.
Right. No, I would reiterate that communication to the surrounding neighbors and abutters is going to be important, because they will certainly share their thoughts with us. All right, any other questions?
You want to ask them their next steps, their timeline?
Without putting you on the spot, though, if we were to see an application, what do you anticipate the timing to be for such an application and for the additional detail in the model and some of the other information?
Microphone, please.
Grab the microphone. You just see the microphone.
The people at home won't hear you if you're not on the microphone.
Should go.
Initially, we have the Historic District Commission that we have to deal with, and then that isn't until the 27th. And then John has some site plan work to do, so I would think it probably would be a month and a half before we'd have a full and final application.
Okay, so,
Quick.
yeah, so you're thinking October.
Yes, yep.
All right,
Great.
excellent. And we look forward to the additional work you're doing, the additional information we have, and to all the other, our peer boards and commissions and their feedback as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming in.
Good luck.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining us.
We can all carry on now. Action at 7:40. Do you have some administrative reports for us?
Not really, except to remind the board, we did talk about adding a meeting October 15th in pencil, and I think that I'll be able to chase up some stuff for you guys to do that night. So if you could kind of ink that in. We did just hear who our liaisons are for advisory for zoning articles. So it's the most wonderful time of the year.
Yes.
And so, although it may not be, last year was an unusual year, but it will certainly, it's time to start talking about it as a board.
Yes.
And so I will be bringing forward to you, I'll be getting out there and completing my field work, and we'll be having some conversations with regard to the downtown overlay district, the physical extent of it, if it needs to be nipped or tucked at all, and then also possible tools that the board could use to look at heights of structures, and then also how to strengthen the design review requirements within that bylaw. They're already there, but maybe we need to do some wordsmithing to make the intent really jump out and be clearer. So we have talked about that in the past. We haven't talked about it recently, but it's still on the radar. So that is what I'm thinking the October 15th meeting would be a good time to talk about. And then if the board is going to entertain possibly modifying the extent of the overlay district, it may make sense to go take a walk, and schedule an outing.
Yeah, no, we had discussed that, so I think that would be worth doing, for sure. And actually, I hope, because it's more of a scheduling administrative item, we're going to get into the rules and regulations later in the agenda. I just want my colleagues to give some thought. Given that we don't have a full house tonight, if we're going to approve those, we may want to do it when both Judy and Gary are here. So depending on how the conversation goes later on, we may poll folks to see if you can come a little bit earlier on the 24th. So we might be able to do that before that meeting, perhaps 6:30 or so, just so that we can do it as a full board. I don't think it will merit or require a separate meeting on its own, but the 24th is quite a full agenda. So if we're not able to button them up today, we might ask you to come a little bit early then. So just hold that thought until until we have the rules and regulations discussions later on in the agenda. And with that, we're a couple of minutes before 7:45. If you think it's all right to go with Form A? Sure. Excellent. Greg, welcome.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Gregory Morse. I'm a registered engineer with Morse Engineering, representing the property owner, Lilia Weinstein. This is a A&R or approval not required subdivision plan of land. This is an approval not required subdivision plan of land for property at 170 and 174 Chief Justice Cushing Highway. Pointing out the features of the plan, CJC Highway Route 3A is at the bottom of the page here. The state highway layout is a paved layout, is a public roadway. The property line here is shown in bold, the perimeter of the property. What we're proposing to do is to create a new lot line. That new lot line is depicted here, creating Lot 1 and Lot 2. This is in the Residence C zoning district. It requires a minimum of 40,000 square feet of lot size. It requires a minimum of 150 feet of frontage. Both of the lots as depicted comply with the minimum frontage, and they both comply with the minimum lot area as well. Should be working.
Is the house there now, Greg?
Yeah, there's a house on Lot 2 right now. It would comply with the setbacks
Yep.
with the proposed configuration.
And you've got exactly 150 feet of frontage on the other one, on what is being called Lot 1.
Correct.
All right, with many of these, this is pretty straightforward. My colleagues have any questions?
No, I have none.
I don't.
Is there anyone here from the public who's come to speak to the Form A? Hearing none, thank you for coming in, Greg. It does seem to meet all of the requirements. Can I have a motion to endorse the Form A plans for 174 and 170 Chief Justice Cushing Highway, Hingham, Massachusetts?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Do we need to sign that?
Yes, please. We'll sign it
Pick
for
that up later this week.
you. Can have it today, if you like, 2 seconds.
We're a real-time operation, Greg. So.
Most times make me wait a day.
Customer service.
What's that?
So just be careful because it might smudge.
I won't roll it up all the way. How about that?
Thank you very much.
Until it dries.
Thank you.
Thank
Want
you,
rubber
Greg.
band?
Great, thank you.
Alrighty. Moving right along. So the next item is a request to continue the 323 North Street project that was currently on the agenda. The applicant is asked to continue the hearings to November 5th, 2018, and extend the decision deadlines to December 5th, 2018. Unlike typical requests that we will just grant, I feel like we have to have at least a short conversation about this one this evening. Looking back, when the application went in on, I believe, October of 2017, 323 North Street has been on our agenda a dozen times. We've actually had a hearing 4 of those dozen times. We've had exactly 1 hearing in the calendar year of 2018. followed by, I believe, 6 requests to continue without any additional information from the applicant. The hearings that we had with the applicant, I would say, were productive in the sense of identifying issues and having substantive conversations. The fact that that has sort of ceased for the better part of 6 months or so is a little bit troubling, and it can be difficult administratively when we're trying to balance agendas and we anticipate that a project that's going to take a lot of time is going to be on the agenda, and then of course it falls off, and it's been doing that repeatedly. I'm interested in feedback, if any, from my colleagues, but failing any additional information, should we grant this continuance, failing any additional information of substance that addresses the issues that have been raised by the time we meet with them in November, my suggestion would be that we be, as a board, prepared to act one way or the other at that meeting. Alternatively, the applicant could certainly consider withdrawal and reapplication in the future. So it's a little bit of sort of context, I think, for this one before we just kind of continue automatically. Thoughts?
Well, thank you. I think the biggest issue with the continual applications for a project of the scope is that we do, I know Mary does, try to arrange the agenda to address these big ticket items, and this obviously has a lot of interest from butters. So, I mean, you make a good point. The board has liberally granted continuances in the past, for for all applicants, but maybe after a certain point, we need the applicant to justify cause and explain why they need to continue to seek continuances. A court, if an individual presents cause, and there's good cause, a board finds good cause, well, then it's okay to continue it out. But I think the chair makes a good point that this has been on quite a bit, and so we could maybe make this the final continuance.
I think it's worth considering. I mean, not least of which is the continuances are somewhat perfunctory when they ask for them. There's no context for why they're asking for another continuance. Do they need more specific time to do something specific to address any of the items that have been raised? If they were communicating with us on progress, for example, that might be helpful for us to consider. But, and again, you both have a lot more history on the board than I do. So if it is perfectly common to have this many continuances, then I can stand down. But I feel like they should just be given a sense that we might be prepared to act one way or the other at the November 5th meeting, should we grant the continuance.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is very well said. I think it's timely. I think the data that you present, it surprises me, even though I've been at all these hearings and agreed to all these continuances, to hear those numbers is actually a bit shocking. And we have been liberally granting continuances, but it is something that is causing, it's concern on our end. It's a lot of scheduling. It's a lot of work for Mary. We show up, we're here, we have a quorum, we're ready to roll. And, I think I think there should be a higher burden on them as a matter of course to explain why they need a continuance. Because the fact of the matter is we don't get any leeway. We have our decision deadlines, and if we were to not show up and not have a quorum and not act, it doesn't work the other way, right?
It's not reciprocal, right?
And we're certainly understanding, and certainly I think that we're very flexible when people present, valid reasons as to why they need continuances, and many people do. But I think you're right that this is an example where we haven't really heard much in over 6 months, and we have very full agendas. We're trying to be efficient and meet a little less frequently so we don't all burn out, and at the end of the day it wastes our time and wastes a lot of Mary's time to continue this cycling forward. So I agree that a message to the applicant in this case, and generally, that you need to explain why people need to explain why they need continuances. I think that's entirely reasonable.
And my memory is right, we did the sidewalk out here a year ago, last
Yeah.
fall, right?
Yep.
So it's
Yes.
been pending, has been pending for quite a while.
So, and again, it's a complicated project, right? But, we are not the only interested parties on this one either, right? There are a bunch of neighbors who are interested in this as well, and for them to continue to show up or plan to show up, and then there's continuance over and over again, there's multiple interests in mind. So I guess before I make a motion to continue the hearings, if staff can convey to the applicant the gist of the conversation we had here and the interest of the board in seeing some action from the applicant, either some information to provide and an actual hearing in November, or a request to withdraw for now to reconsider and reapply, or this board is, I will suggest, will consider acting at the next meeting. With that, I'll make a motion to continue the hearings on 323 North Street, James and Bernadette Ippolito, to November 5th, 2018, and extend the decision deadlines to December 5th, 2018.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. So now on to another request to continue from 143 Summer Street. Again, a pretty straightforward request to continue. But again, this is,
This is,
Oh, you
the
are-
applicant is here.
okay, excellent. Welcome.
I figured I'd be here to answer any questions you might have.
I appreciate it. Because we're on HCAM for the friends at home, if you'd come to the microphone, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, my name's Mike Sofrino. I live at 143 Summer Street.
Okay.
And the lot in question is actually 133 Summer Street.
Okay.
It's a separate lot.
So this has been before us for not nearly as long as the previous application, but for some months as well.
Yeah.
Since you're here, if you could give us a status and an update on why you're continuing now and what you think you
Yes,
will
absolutely.
have, because there has been some question about a landscape plan, which we were hoping to have seen some time back.
That's correct. I was not here at the last meeting because it was my daughter's college graduation from BC, so we have family and obligations that day, so we were not here. Greg Tansey presented the engineering side of the plans, and with that, he asked me for a landscape plan. So I prepared and gave it to him, and he posted onto his letterhead, basically, and that's what you people were given. So I designed to produce that plan that you saw at the last meeting. A little history, I am a landscape architect. I am not registered. So I have met with a lot of associates that I know that are registered landscape architects, and typically they are more on commercial sides of things, not residential. And that's why we hired Greg to handle the engineering aspect, because he is a registered engineer. And so when it came time for the landscape, I spoke to Mike Clancy, and he says, no, just throw some plants, just show some plants and what your idea is, your conceptual plan is, and I think that will be good. So essentially I did much more than that. And I think what I did was to provide a buffer from my neighbor at 31 Old Colony, who are here, and it's a very attractive landscape layout. And I also did one along Summer Street. There is currently some steel posts from an old fence that was in disrepair that I took down. And when we were cited for having cleared more trees on our lot than we were allowed to by zoning, I talked to Mike Clancy about it, and I asked him if I could remove those, and he asked me what is the issue? And I said, well, they're pretty unsightly driving up Summer Street. And he said, no. That was a year ago in August. Then we asked him again this past spring in writing through the engineers, and he again said no. I don't understand that because they are unsightly. There's no reason why they shouldn't be taken down. Nobody's benefit by having them there. And I just don't understand why those couldn't be taken down to help everybody. The Andersons are here, and they are, we were very dear friends with the Andersons and their mother. My son got married a month ago. Their mother was invited to the wedding.
Okay, let's not talk about specific
No,
people.
no, but I think that, okay, but I think that there's been a lot of things that have been said that have not been true. So I'm not going to go through any of that tonight. I just want you to understand, so on May 21st, when Greg called me the following day or 2 days later and said they now want a registered landscape architect to submit a plan, I was a little taken aback because it doesn't seem necessary. I practiced as a landscape designer for 25, 30 years. I've worked for Kennedy Country Gardens when I was in college. I've worked under a landscape architect registered in Hingham for 5 years, who's now passed away, Bert Matroni. I have ran a business in Boston, corporate interior landscape company for 18 years. I now run an event planning business and production business, and what we do is we go on to properties, we supply all the fresh flowers, which we do in-house. I do them myself with a team of members, so I have the history and the credibility to be able to produce a landscape plan. And so when the meeting said they needed, I called Mary and I said I wanted to see if I could get a waiver on the, I think I did, on the registered landscape plan. She said, well, you have to come to the board and ask them for that. And so I invite you up to my property, all of you individually, to walk through and what my plan is. I do have a 60 by 120 area for lawn right now. My wife was a college tennis player, captain of her team collegiately. We do want to put a tennis court in. Right from day one, I spoke to Mary about that. And Mike Clancy, they had no issues with it. They said, you actually don't need a building permit in this town to put up a tennis court, which I didn't know. So when we recognized after we cut down the trees and my neighbors asked the zoning enforcer to come up and take an inspection that we were in violation. Had no idea up until then that you could not clear your lot. And, I'm a landscaper. I mean, that's what I do. I go in and I recreate and I start all over. And I asked Mike Clancy, how would I have ever known that? And he says, you never would have known that because you're not an architect or a builder. And I don't practice as a landscape architect. So how would I have ever known that? There's no way. And he goes, I agree. And I said, would you have called me out if on this on your own? He said, absolutely not. So it was a, well, I'm just saying,
Mike Clancy isn't here, so let's not,
So anyways, we've been working very hard to continue to do what we can on our property at 143. I've spoken to a neighbor on Old Colony. On the other side, we put up a 6-foot stockade fence. He actually said he liked it. It's a huge noise buffer for him now and a visual buffer for him. And his wife liked it so much, she actually had our fence company come over and do work for them. So they seemed fine with it. There was an issue at the last meeting that I was using my property as a venue for weddings. Never is that the case. What I did is, dear friends of mine, Bob and Cindy Sullivan, she's the secretary at St. Paul's. Their daughter was getting married. The kids had no place to go. They really wanted to get married. I offered my backyard. Didn't charge them. It was all, they just used my yard. They got a local caterer, and I was obviously there to help oversee it because that's what I do. But there was no charge on any of that. So, but I've been accused of running a business and using it as a venue, which is not true, and I've told the Andersons that as well. And then, unfortunately, things got snippy between us and the Andersons, and that's where we are here today.
Sir, that background about your issues with the
Well,
butters,
but I have
it's not
on
appropriate.
audio,
It's not
but-
appropriate, it's not appropriate.
Well, but can I-
Speak to the merits of your application, please.
All right, so I will, but I'll stop. But when I listened to the audio from the last meeting and the mudslinging towards me specifically and the questions that you guys were generating at me was, it was similar to what I'm talking about now. So my application, I met with the landscape architect. We both agreed that, first of all, you don't need a landscape architect to do this. But I have engaged and contracted to get noise studies done. And we are having a noise study done both in the summer and in the winter. And we're doing it based on what the current conditions are. And we are able to, with other neighbors, permission to go in and do a noise study on their wooded lot. So we will have that so we know what we need to do to soften the noise. My wife and I don't want to hear more noise. We're not, we live there. We love the house. We're not looking for more noise. Visually, I don't want to look at Summer Street. I know that people say I've completely ruined from the board members that when you come up Summer Street, it's a blight on Summer Street. Well, I don't think it is. And if you look going up Summer Street, it's not all woods. It's a lot of privet hedging that goes right up to the traffic light. And so we had similar vision to do that as well. So these are all on the plan. I don't think that Greg, I know he's not here, did a good job of presenting the landscape plan, and he has admitted that he is not a landscape architect or a designer. And I wish if I had known that that was going to be such a hot issue at the last meeting, I would have deferred and asked to have a delay on that.
So just to clarify, you don't think you need to hire a landscape architect, even though we've asked you to?
Well, I'm
do you not
asking-
intend to?
No, I'm asking to have a waiver on that because it's a lot of money, and I can use that money for plant product and towards the project. Why would you make me spend $5,000-$6,000 when I can be using it towards buying plant material and getting this project underway? So that's why I'm asking you to consider a waiver on the landscape, having a registered landscape architect, because it's going to delay the process. I was hoping in the May 21st meeting you would approve it. My son was getting married in August 4th. We had planned a big party, and we couldn't do it because we didn't get approval, and there was no way we could do it. The house was in disarray. The yard was in disarray. We couldn't put a tent up. So that was disappointing. So then during the summer, I'm busy with work and the meetings and things like that. In addition to the sound barrier issues, we are very sensitive to the visual, and we are not looking to put anybody in a position to have to be exposed to Summer Street. It is what it is. It's a busy road. I don't want to look at it. And I think that we are trying very hard to work with what we have. We don't have deep pockets. I've already out of pocket about $14,000, $15,000. You're asking me to spend another $5,000 for a registered landscape architect. I've done work at the Kavanaugh's house, Anderson's house, landscaping. I look at it and it looks beautiful. Her mother would probably have to vouch that I am an extremely talented one. I could get this room filled with 50 people from Hingham saying my work as a landscape architect is phenomenal. So,
But you're not a landscape architect, so
but why? My question is, why do you need a landscape architect? I've been practicing as a landscape designer. I am actually certified as well from the Radcliffe Institute for Landscape Design on the residential level.
I would answer that question by saying because our rules and regulations require it, and I don't think we've ever waived that.
But
I
I'm
can't-
asking,
I can't think of a time we've ever waived that.
So, but you understand it takes time, and that's why we have to continue these things. And even if I was able to get it done, the engineering aspect of this project would have taken time, and I still probably would have been hit or miss on the planting season. So now it's September, I'm here, I need to continue it because I don't have any results back from the barrier testing, sound testing, and I don't have, and I need that information, and there's so much more.
For the landscape architect.
Yes, absolutely. It's all part of it. And the plant material, she had no problem with my landscape. This person works for a very prestigious firm in Boston. She has no problem with what the plant material I chose. I think that when you guys were reading it, again, no disrespect, I don't think you really understood what the plant material was and really saw what the vision. There was no pretty drawings like we just saw for North Street. If you need a rendering of that nature, I can have one produced, but again, there's a cost to that. If you're really good at reading landscape plans, I'm happy. That would be great. But if you really need a visual, I can give you a visual as well. And I invite you to come up, take a look, walk around with me, understand what I'm doing. We've addressed all the drainage issues. We're going to fix those.
We had talked about a site walk after the landscape architect had done their designs, but sorry.
No, it's okay. So you brought up needing time. Let's just talk about where we are. Let's just back up for a second, because I find it a little bit unfair for you to stand here tonight and say that you need time when the reality of the situation is you've known for 13 months that you're in violation of our zoning bylaw.
No,
and perhaps you didn't know when you cut down the trees, but you did
understand.
know as of the letter from the building inspector, August 9th, 2017. And so you have had time, and you could have asked or sent a letter or met with Mary or communicated in some way to us in May some of these issues that you're raising tonight. And I also find it frustrating that you requested a
Excuse me, but
continuance for
I-
tonight. Could you please let me finish?
Well, no.
Will you
because-
please let me finish?
Okay.
I find it frustrating that you asked for a continuance tonight. I'm not prepared to speak to the merits of your application because we came here tonight expecting to continue, and yet you are bringing in personalities, you are bringing in conversations that
Only
you
what
had
was
in your yard with Mike
as
Clancy,
example
and I'm not
from the
prepared
last
to
meeting.
discuss the merits of this case this evening. I am prepared to discuss your continuance, and we continue to request the materials that we requested and expected at the last
So
meeting.
you're not
And
accepting.
therefore, we are waiting for a site visit. And in fact, it's additionally frustrating because the abutters, the Andersons, when they spoke at the meeting back in May, that they took their time to attend, as did some other neighbors, they spoke directly to the fact that this is precisely what they expected to happen, is that it would continue to be delayed and continued, and here we are.
It
And
is not
so I don't,
something that
you
I
need,
was looking
you
to
need, you don't
continue.
need more time. What you need is to do what needs to be done to remedy the violation that exists on your property.
That's fine. Who's going to pay my bills? I don't have that kind of money, $6,000 in my bank account to go pay for a registered landscape architect.
Well, if you can't comply with our requirements, don't file an application. I mean, I don't know what.
I was told when
requirements
we
are
filed
requirements.
the
We don't
application, it was
waive.
not to be a registered landscape architect plan. It was just a landscape
Well,
plan.
I don't remember ever
Mike
granting that
Clancy
waiver.
told me that right face to face.
The application was to us, to Mike Clancy.
So for the board to consider is whether or not, there's a couple of different ways to proceed, if I may. So the board is still looking for a landscape plan. I had understood that a landscape architect had been secured. I think
They had, and we've
Okay.
been having discussions.
So he has contracted with a landscape architect, he just does not have the finished product. What I had suggested to Greg Tansey, and I asked him to call you, and I think he did, was that in an effort to save the applicant money, before the landscape architect that he's talked to gets to 100% design, it might help everybody if they had a conceptual plan and this board could have a site walk, because it would be more efficient. Then the applicant doesn't get to 100% design. He's trying to remedy it, and he's trying to hire somebody. We have no reason to not take him at his word, but I have said to his engineer, it would be challenging to have them get to 100% design and then come to the board, because the board may still have comments or questions
Not
or
requiring
feedback.
100% design, right? We're just requiring.
Correct. So is there a way to have a conversation with his landscape architect, some conceptual level design, even if it's a marked up plan, and the planning board, and have a site visit in advance of the October 22nd meeting. So that when they come in October 22nd, you will have had a site walk, you won't make any decisions, but then you can think about it in advance of the meeting and be prepared to have a productive dialogue.
I think we've been hoping for a site walk with some plans to look at in advance for a couple of months now. So, but I would much prefer to entertain that than perhaps a future request for a waiver, because you're not asking for one now. What was before us is the continuance. If we continue to October 22nd, since you're here, do you think we would have landscape
Well, let me ask you a
architects
question.
work that we could do a site walk with?
I could get a landscape plan stamped tomorrow, and it would be a very good plan. So is it just the stamp you're looking for? I don't understand. All right, I will get you a landscape plan, because I've further developed what I had submitted to you people back in May, and I will take it to the landscape architect. They will review it, and they will stamp it as a landscape plan. And it will be on a conceptual level. We'll list the plants, and we'll give it to you. And then hopefully that will help you alleviate any delay on you guys' end. Now, with that said, it's very difficult to predict the timeline on when the work can get done, because the site engineering has to get done and all that, and that's a lot of work that we're happy to do, because we now realize that we made that mistake. As a matter of fact, we have compost tubes being installed in the next 3 weeks to capture any runoff that's coming off the lot. And so that was something that was brought up. And by Mike Clancy made that request.
So, if, a question for the board is, I know that you don't have the full board here, but between the three of you, are we able, and the applicants here, are we able to schedule a site visit? Compare our calendars and put something in, understanding that if you don't get a submittal of a landscape plan, you wouldn't have the site visit. But if the applicant is able to produce a conceptual landscape plan, which is what the board has asked for,
Do you want that conceptual plan to be stamped as well?
it would be, it might make sense if we could schedule a site visit, because that's what everybody wants.
Yes.
So when,
To the
is that
week
okay?
from-
Can
just
we?
to-
Yeah, absolutely, let's
To the
do
week
it.
from Saturday.
22nd in the morning?
Yeah, morning.
Do you think we'd have the landscape plan by the
Tomorrow.
22nd?
He said tomorrow.
Yes.
He said he could have it tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Oh, I thought you said you could have it tomorrow.
Well, I was, I mean, I can if I have
Great.
to push it, but I'm not gonna. So I can have it easily for, now the 22nd, I do have to be down in Philadelphia that weekend. So that's Saturday and Sunday. I'm leaving Friday, coming back Sunday night.
So that's not good.
So that's not gonna work.
I could do it anytime during the week. I work out of the home.
What about,
This Saturday?
what about October 6th?
October 6th.
That Columbus Day
That's
weekend.
Columbus Day
That's
weekend.
Columbus
Stay
Day
away.
weekend.
Could we do the 29th? Does that not work for you, Mary?
You can do the 29th. I have tickets for Hamilton, so
Oh, good.
I would be in big trouble if I didn't go.
You can come during the week as
You can
well.
go with me.
Does it have to be
I mean,
a
I can't
weekend?
do
Yeah.
the Saturday. I could do a Sunday, you know. That's the thing. I couldn't do the 29th. Now, you're welcome to do it without me, but I would probably like to
We could do,
participate.
we've done them on Sunday, but we could do the 30th.
Okay.
September 30.
30th, how about 1 o'clock? Or,
The house tour is that afternoon, and I'm church from 10 to 12.
Well, that's the
yeah,
house tours,
that's why I
the
said
30th.
1. I was thinking morning might be tough for people.
Yeah. The house tours.
What time's the house tour start?
I'll have the house tours that day.
Can we do the 7th?
You want to do October 7th or
That's still
October
cool.
13th?
Oh, that's Columbus Day weekend.
Columbus Day
Sorry.
weekend.
How about October
Short
13th?
attention span.
I could do it this weekend.
You want to do it this Saturday or something?
Well, I don't want to promise that. When I said I can get it, but I would need to meet with this, go into Boston, meet with this person, I didn't think that's unrealistic. So, October 13th is fine. I have a wedding on Friday night, but I'm home all weekend after that.
I could do early in the morning or the 30th. I'm sorry, back to September 30th. But I don't know if you guys are willing to do it early on a Sunday morning.
How early?
9, 8?
9. Yeah, it can be 9.
Is that,
I think 9's good.
would that work for you, Gordon?
I will make it work.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right, so what I'm hearing is that the board has scheduled a site visit for 9 a.m., September 30th. The goal of the site visit is they'll have your conceptual
I will
landscape
give it to
plan.
you before you come, so you
Please
have
do.
it.
We will meet at your site
Yes,
and,
pull into 143 Summer Street. It's a large circular driveway and just park in the circle.
park in the circle. Okay, so we'll meet there. And
And I'm assuming you post on the website when it comes in so that other people can see it?
I will, and I'll let the other board members know. For the applicant, so this board will not be making any, votes. They'll just basically be asking questions that relate to the plan and making sure that as they walk the site, they understand what your proposal is in relation to the site.
Absolutely.
And that will inform the conversation
So that
when
when
you
the
come back.
meeting's on the 10th or the
ask if
15th, the
anybody else-
22nd, I don't even know what day it is.
The meetings, you've requested to continue the hearing to October 22nd.
Perfect, perfect.
And so any feedback or thoughts that they might have from
Right.
that,
time.
they'll give
Put it
to you
on.
at the 22nd.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay. I want to apologize for getting a little bit anxious, but when I heard the audio from the last meeting, it was a little disturbing, and my wife and I. And so I don't know if you have that audio and listen to it, but I would encourage you to go revisit it before we meet, because you spent a lot of time on the property.
Yes, we were there, yep.
Okay.
So, with that, would anyone else like to speak on the continuance at this time? Then I will make a motion to continue the hearing on 143 Summer Street to October 22nd, 2018, and extend the decision deadline to November 22nd, 2018.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That site visit is a public meeting, by the way, so interested parties in the audience can attend, right?
It's public,
We don't have discussion, it's just
Yeah.
we don't have
explanatory.
discussion.
But it is
I can
public.
send the plan, or it'll be posted online. in case
You
people
send it to
can't
me
go.
and we'll post it.
I didn't
yeah.
know you had it online last week.
Fabulous. If you come to the microphone, you can. Sorry, jumping in for Gordon. It's good.
I just had a quick question as to whether or not this plan will be the same one that was presented at the previous meeting.
It'll be a revised plan.
Okay, I just remember that on the last plan, there wasn't any noise, any account for a noise buffer. So, for replacing the old growth trees, so,
There is definitely.
He has to come to the microphone, but,
and replanting the kind of trees that were suggested, or,
Well,
because they were decorative trees before that provided no,
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm very sensitive to tree species.
okay. I just wanted to know that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. A little more eventful continuances that we've
Yeah, right.
had to
Well, I think that's
consider.
all yours.
That's all right. No, I have mine. So, Mr. McCarthy, thank you for your patience. And I guess, for ours.
Thank you. Sean, you gotta talk in the microphone when you do, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.
So this is, at last, a one-year look back for Hingham Yoga LLC that was granted a special permit A3 in January of 2017. So we're a little bit past the one-year period, but we have some more information. I guess this is class attendance. There are some concerns relative to parking and class size and that kind of thing. So, Mr. McCarthy, why don't you walk us through what you've handed us here?
Sure. My name's Sean McCarthy. I own and operate Hingham Yoga. Here this evening to review the occupancy permit for yoga. Right now, we stand at Monday through Friday between the hours of 10:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. We're allowed 9, and before 10:30 a.m. we're allowed 25, and after 5:30 p.m. we're allowed 25. As you can see from the analysis in front of you, attendance class size has been anywhere from 2 to 8, and that we actually 2 to 8 people in attendance per class. Rather slow first year. We actually didn't
How
open
can
until.
we see that? How do you see that? Where's the breakout where it says 2 to 8 on a particular class?
So this is a 1 year from June. We opened June 1st of 2017, and so I did it.
This is 1 year of data?
It is.
So
Yep.
for 1 year, on Sunday at 9 a.m. for an entire year, 131 people came?
Correct.
But it could have been 50 on one day and 1 on a bunch of other days, right? So we don't really know how many people were in a class ever with this information.
Not off of this printout. I did send Mary one which had average class size. So it took the average of all that, and it came out between 2 and 8. If it was 50, I'd love it to be 50, but it wasn't.
Well, careful. So this is, I guess I would say this is informative, but not entirely helpful then on that case, right? Because what we're concerned about is class size relative to parking, right? And
Correct.
parking demand.
Yes.
So really, what we need, I mean, in the average, problem with averages, as they say, if Bill Gates goes to a Bruins game, the average fan's a millionaire, right? So averages are not that helpful, right? So so we really need to get at what your regular attendance is in these classes.
It's between 2 and 8 students. It's pretty dismal, to be quite honest.
Well, some folks have had concerns about parking around your class times, so.
I don't think I don't think your concern should be actually the yoga studio, which has 2 to 8 people in a class, sometimes 1 and sometimes none. Our neighbors, the cycle studio, they have 25 to 35 people per class. If it's a parking issue, it's definitely not a yoga
issue, right?
Definitely not a yoga issue.
No, this is not a yoga question. I agree with you that.
Yeah.
This is not.
Right.
So obviously, the downtown parking area, as you know, having a business down there, it's very
Right.
congested, right? So
Right.
I know that we're doing look back, but also ultimately you want to ask for an increase. So we had, about a year ago, we had another fitness proprietor in the downtown area come in, and they wanted to expand their numbers. And, we said, well, where are the extra people going to park? And what's the parking plan?
Right.
And they didn't really give us an answer, so they withdrew their request. And I kind of look at your request similarly, where I get it that your capacity is probably a little low, lower than you'd like, you know, as a business owner. But I think you're gonna have to show us, give us a little more information, a little more detail about how this is gonna work. Because it is congested, and whether that's the success of another business or just the vibrant downtown we have, you're
Right.
gonna have to really show us, hey, this is how this is gonna work for me and not overburden or overtax the parking situation. So what some entrepreneurs have done is they've kind of, they've increased their capacity during off hours or hours where the downtown area is a little less frequently
Yeah.
used. So I would encourage you to look at something like that.
Yeah, well, I'm happy with the status quo, which we're allowed under the current, because the previous use of the property was office space. So that's how we got to the original 9 between the hours of 10:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. was that 1,800 square feet, 200 square feet per parking spot, so that's how we got to the 9. I'm happy with the 9. I mean, we haven't gone over it, and it's slow going.
So you aren't looking to increase?
I had said to Mary if 9's doing the trick during the day for us, it is. If we could get to 15, which I had asked when I originally came before the board for 15, and we settled back on the 9 because that was what was allowed by square footage. And to
Yeah,
get-
I'm not telling you can't get to the 15, what I'm telling you is,
Yeah.
it's almost like the burden is on the applicant to show us, hey, this is gonna work because of this hours. It's
Right.
easier to make this work for an already overtaxed parking area.
Sure. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm happy with the 9. If I think we need to get to the 15, I'm happy to put an application before the board for the 15. I'm happy with what I have. It's slow going, but this is my 3rd yoga studio, and the first 2 didn't make money in the first 2 years, so we're almost there with Hingham Yoga. We'll probably take another year before we break even. And with class size, so we're probably at least 9 to 12 months out looking for that 15 during the day anyway.
Well, we want you to succeed, we wanna help you succeed.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
I think,
we
well, I think a
want our
lot of,
business, we want our downtown area to succeed and everybody down there to do well, so
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear you say that you.
well, I think a lot of it
choose
is the problem that you speak of, it is the parking. I think that deters a lot of people. A lot of working out or going to an appointment wherever, it's a matter of how easy it is to get through the door. And if it's gonna take you 20 minutes to find a parking spot, you're less apt to go to that appointment or to work out at that time. So it is a location issue. It wasn't, it's a 2nd floor rear in the square. I think I got a little excited about being in the square and didn't really think through that parking issue of what the average, person going to work out or going to yoga class. It becomes, you spend a half hour looking for a parking spot, you're sitting in traffic for 15 minutes before that. It becomes almost a 2-hour ordeal to go work out. And a lot of people,
Right.
if it's raining out, you don't have to get off the couch. It's a lot easier just to stay home.
What are you gonna-
I can attest to that, yes.
You can encourage your folks coming to yoga to park on State Street lot. It's, plenty of parking down there, a little bit of a walk, but really, in reality, it really isn't.
Yeah.
In the wintertime, it's a little tough, but to get to 50 south, it's not that bad at all.
Right.
One option.
Yeah. So, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and we could keep the 9 during the week and the 25 in the off-peak hours. I'm okay with that.
And the decision indicates your morning classes are supposed to end at 9:45.
Saturday.
Well,
The-
on Saturday and, yes. So,
But so, if I may,
yes,
the weekday classes ending at, I think, at 9:40, I don't have it in front of me, if you can help me, 9:45. is when the off-peak hour occupancy ends. So a 9:30 class that goes to 10:30, we're not over that 9 limit, which is permitted during the day.
So, I'm sorry, so the applicant, the permit says your class must end at 9:45?
On Saturdays.
No, on the.
On Saturdays, yes.
Well, then, it should end at 9:45 on Saturday. If the permit says it should end at 9:45 on Saturday, 9:45 it should be ended.
But, okay, I hear that, but as a commercial space where I'm allowed an occupancy of 9 in normal business hours, I would presume that I can operate on a 7-day-a-week schedule, and if at 9:45 is when that off-peak time ends for the 25, I assumed that I shouldn't have, but my assumption was that I can still operate at an occupancy of 9 during normal business hours after that 9:45.
So the 9:45 stop only applies to the class of 25, in your opinion?
That's how I understood it, and I apologize if that wasn't it, but
Well,
I have the decision. Do you have the decision in front of you?
I do, and this is what I would say to you, sir, and to all applicants who come before us. What's in the four corners of this permit is what you and everybody else should be operating under. So if it said 9:45, end at 9:45. Because I think it's important, we put a lot of work into this permit, as we do with all of ours, particularly those in the downtown area. And when we specifically put times in there, it's done for a reason, to accommodate everybody in downtown, everybody in those areas. So I would just ask you to make sure you comply with the four corners of the document.
so, okay, I understand that, so I'm not allowed to open for business even though I'm allowed the 9 on a regular business permit because of the previous use of the space. I wouldn't be allowed 9?
I don't know I don't think the use of the space by anyone else applies to the permit that you obtained.
Well, the number of spots designated.
They're reading, this is your decision.
I will say, I think I see your confusion, right? Or your assumption, but the permit's pretty clear.
It's very clear.
Yeah, page 2.
Yeah, number
Page
1,
three
it
is-
says, so on Friday, okay, so on Friday, classes end by 9:45, having class size 25. From 9:45 to the end of the day, class is limited to 9.
That's for Friday. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
On Saturdays, classes must end by 9:45 a.m. with a class size of 25, full stop. Period. Right? There's no follow-on sentence there, right?
You were correct, so I'm not just.
That's why we're here. And
But
that's why we do
again-
these lookbacks.
But again, particularly with this project and other fitness operations downtown, we did put a lot of thought into those times, because we are trying to accommodate a lot of uses going on in the morning hours of downtown, so it does seem pretty clear to me, but maybe, it's always good taking a look at it and make sure you're good with that, good with it, and we can give any guidance, or Mary can give you guidance, we'll be happy to do that.
You do see the distinction now between the Friday and the Saturday.
Yes. So I'll remove the 10 a.m. class on Saturday. So be it. Probably won't be back in front of the board either, but it's probably close the doors when that happens. All right.
Any other questions for Mr. McCarthy?
No, I don't.
Any more from you?
What, in terms of other businesses in the square and policing of their occupancy during those hours, other than coming to the board and presenting numbers, is the town, how does the town know, other than the business owner coming and presenting something, how does the town know that somebody's operating not within their guidelines or over their occupancy for those certain hours?
Typically, we'll get complaints, and then we'll investigate them. We'll have the Mr. Clancy go out and investigate them. People, especially in the downtown area, are very aware of what other people are allowed to do and the limits of their permits, and will speak up, but it goes throughout town. So it's typically on a complaint basis, but we do investigate or do periodic investigations.
And in some cases, lookbacks like this, particularly for sort of intensive uses. So that's, you weren't singled out for any other reason other than the lookback that was put into the decision.
Okay. Good.
Thank you for coming in. I think we're good.
Thank you.
Good luck.
All right,
Yep, good
thanks,
luck.
take care.
Do you want to do Oakwood?
Oh, did I skip that? I did. Well, this will, I guess, be a more expedient request to continue. So I gather they had some additional work to do.
So- Correct. The applicant's attorney just got back from vacation today, so although they were working with real estate counsel on the master deed and some questions about that, there was a little gap and things were not 100%. There's some, a feeling of having the board, having them come before you when everything's all set. So I talked to Steve McLaughlin today. He said he was going to contact real estate counsel. We were going to have a conference call later this week, and hopefully everything will be all set for you on the 24th.
So it's just a continuance to our next meeting.
Correct. Instead of having them here and they're not ready.
Right, right, right,
It
right.
sounds like they've got a plan and they're making progress, so
Yeah.
I'm comfortable to continue it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll make a motion to continue the discussion of the endorsement of plans for Oakwood Circle FRD to our next meeting, September 24th, 2018.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's a continuance. So the final item on the agenda is our continued review of possible revisions to the board's rules and regulations. Mary and John Chessie have been working on this with us for some time. So we will open it up to them. I know you've been speaking with council as well. Mary, you can update us on that.
Just let me come over here and, you all have copies of the draft?
We do.
And so the red is Susan and the blue is you? Is that,
The
Or
red
not
is
quite.
me, the blue is John, and the purple is Sue.
Ah,
okay, thank you.
I have for you. I apologize for not laying it out, there was just so much going on. I have a kind of a summary of proposed changes,
Okay,
which
thank you.
you've seen before, it's essentially the same thing. But,
Thank you.
sure.
This is your.
Earl, thank you.
That's
We're gonna
done.
move that over, thank you.
Ready?
ready.
All right, so thank you very much. We had this conversation in a workshop setting back in August, I believe. If it pleases the board, we're going to approach this essentially the same way. Mr. Chessie and I will be walking you through the proposed revisions to the rules and regulations. There's not a lot of substantive changes since we last discussed it in August. So before you are track changes, versions of the rules and regulations, which we discussed in depth at the workshop meeting of August 13th. Staff views these as technical changes. And the purpose of the proposed changes are To incorporate as requirements some of the standard conditions that the board places on every subdivision approval. One example is on page 19. It's the board is familiar with our standard conditions. Add this note to the cover sheet stating, dot, dot, dot. And it's referring the COA back to the plans, like linking the two together. So when they're recorded, the COA references the plan, and the plan has a note that references the COA. That's a condition, one of many that we place on every provision that the board acts on. Instead of having it as a condition, we've now folded it into the regulations, so it's just required. Another category of changes, so to speak, are to propose to reduce the construction requirements for the smallest of subdivisions that are not expected to be accepted streets. These are the private local roadways, less than 300 feet in length, never to be accepted, serving no more than 3 lots. This board has had a lot of comments from applicants and even other staff talking about the construction requirements and for these small subdivisions, and the board has even granted waivers to some of them over the years. So as part of this revision, we took a look at those, and for example, we're proposing to reduce the depth of gravel from 24 inches to 12 inches. The requirement for drainage to be on a separate lot for the private local roadways, we're saying that you don't have to do that. It could be in an easement as long as it doesn't, the area of that easement isn't counted towards your minimum lot area that's required. Granite curb transitions at catch basins on these really minor projects. Are those really necessary? So those criteria and revisions are built in here. We're intending to also remedy some of the challenges experienced during inspections by clarifying the requirements in the regulations. And this, one example is the as-built requirements. Instead of having comments in the field about what has to be on the as-built and, show me where it says in the regulations what has to be on the as-built, well, now the regulations say with great clarity what has to be on the as-built, and that should provide guidance for applicants. It should be useful for staff and just eliminate confusions during construction. Another proposed purpose of these changes is to address some lessons learned over the past several years. We're clarifying the requirement for an interim as-built before the pavement goes down. Many communities require that. We've been using that on recent approvals as a condition to say once the drainage and utilities and grading is done before you put down the binder coat, provide an interim as-built. It's a lot easier to remedy any problems before the pavement goes down. That requirement was not in our regulations. So now it is, and we think that that will be very helpful in managing these projects moving forward. We won't have to condition it. Another kind of lesson learned requirement that's being added in is video camera inspections of utility infrastructure prior to construction and then post-construction. We've had some conversations with applicants, and there hasn't been clarity on if there's a damage to infrastructure. Was it always there, or is it a result of the subdivision construction? This is a tool that will make sure that everybody knows the baseline when we start. Everybody knows the baseline when you get the as-built. We're asking for that camera inspection to come in with your as-built. And then it's very clear to everybody, and we can figure out if something went off track, how did it happen, and we can solve it easier. And then finally, another kind of broad category of purposes of these changes are changing the requirements and the regulations on some of the standards that the board commonly grants waivers for. Now, the best example is on the Cape Cod berms, reducing the required width from 18 inches to 12 inches. The board changed that in your zoning bylaw last year. We're proposing that you follow suit with the subdivision regulations. Another one is the HDPE pipe. The town uses HDPE pipe. We're tweaking our regulations to eliminate the need for that waiver, which has come up on, I think, the last 4 subdivisions that you've done. So those are kind of briefly the impetus behind these changes. This is not a rewrite of the regulations. These are really just succinct, focused, technical changes. Full disclosure, staff anticipates there'll be another more substantive revision to the subdivision regulations, probably in the spring timeframe, involving more of kind of a rewrite and reorganization of the regulations. And that's going to happen along with some stormwater and drainage changes related to the MS4 permit that DPW is working on, and just making sure that our regulations, both bylaw and rules and regulations, are consistent with MS4 requirements, supportive of the town's permit, and that we get the credit that the town needs to have on that MS4 permit as well. And that's a 5-year permit, it's required. So that's coming up. We're already working on those kind of broader revisions, so you will have these regulations back in front of you again. We've tried to keep the scope of these changes succinct in hopes of getting your support and having these, this toolbox augmented, because subdivisions will continue to come in, and we feel that this will just help the town navigate the ongoing development pressure. So John Chessie and I will work through the revisions together, highlighting some of them in more depth than others. As I noted, the blue text these documents have kind of been forwarded back and forth. So some of the colors may be not completely straightforward, but the blue text for the most part are edits put into it by John Chessie. The red for the most part are edits put in by me, and the purple are edits suggested by Susan Murphy. And with that, I think I hit everything. We can get started.
So I was going to go through the summary page here, and I've tagged so I can quickly find the sections to flip to go over in a little more detail.
Okay.
And so if you have questions, and I'm going to skip over things that are like, there's a whole bunch of formatting things and that sort of thing that we're not going to talk about. So I've kind of highlighted the ones I thought made the most sense. First one starts in section 2, where the definition of the private local street. So that's on page 4. If you want to look, you don't have to. But the reason we did that is because I would say the bulk of the subdivisions you see are actually these 2-3 lots. Lots of waivers have been granted on the completing the full cul-de-sac and where the drainage goes and those sort of things. So this just sort of clarifies it and makes it a little bit more straightforward than it has been in the past on some of these. So that's why that's in there. Limits the length, limits the number of lots, but it's sort of a definition of what it is and not to be accepted by the town. But it is still technically a subdivision, because you have to have the subdivision to create the lot. The next ones is some legal things in here, and the fees, which I didn't do the fees, so if you want to, Mary would talk about that if you have questions on that, but I think that's just sort of standard update stuff. Section 3, I'll go over this a little bit. On the preliminary plan, you don't see many preliminary plans, and the reason, one of the main reasons you didn't see many preliminary plans is because the preliminary plans require almost the same drainage effort as the definitive plan. So we've scratched that. We don't require earthwork calculations for a preliminary plan, which, that shouldn't be necessary. I guess you could ask for it if it's a massive earthwork job, but instead, we require a conceptual layout. So you show how you're going to deal with the drainage, where the water goes, how the water flows into the site, out of the site, in a conceptual manner. It's not sized. It's something you can kind of sketch out. People that do this, engineers that do this all the time have a pretty good sense of how big these things have to be and have a sense of what it's got to look like. And I think it's a benefit to the board to actually get preliminary plans instead of jumping right in with a definitive and having to go through a lot of that. So if we pare this back a little bit, maybe you'll get more.
I think it's a benefit for everybody involved, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
So that's that one. For the application for the definitive plan, we've added a few things, and just skimming through. One of them is a copy of the deed for the property. There's no requirement for that, but I think it's a useful one to have. A copy of an order of resource area delineation, so the wetland line's actually real if there are wetlands on the site. We've also added a checklist, which is in an appendix in the back, that goes through, so both the applicants can go through, did they provide all the data, and staff can go through and say, no, wait, you didn't even include this stuff, your application's incomplete. It might save some time. We see, not always, but you do see a fair number of things that are just incomplete, not all the stuff's provided, and it takes a lot of time. You've seen it tonight with continuations, but a lot of those continuations are because of it's not complete.
Yep.
So that's what that one is for. Quick update on the datum. We were referenced the 1929 datum, and the correct datum nowadays to use is 1988. So that's just a reference that's been updated. This next one is this is on page 18. We run into this a lot too, and I just wanted to document it in the regs. Most sites drain somewhere, and providing some information on that off-site data, if it's just off-site, we put it in the regs so that it isn't a discussion or, why do we need to show that? Usually what happens with drainage off of a site is if there's a culvert that the water flows in, most of the time the culvert's not big enough to let the 100-year storm pass through, and there's a backup, and how you affect flooding and those types of things are what we're looking for there. And Mary added on the same page, the submission of the computer analysis. Actually, I added computer analysis files. So instead of just getting a hard copy, sometimes they'll send the computer file so that I can actually look at it.
Yes.
And a few reasons for that. Some of the files allow you to suppress errors, so you wouldn't know that there was an error unless you actually had the file. I can sometimes see it by reading the documents, but not always. And secondly, a lot of the discussion is on assumptions that are made, and I may disagree with assumptions. And if I take and have the file, I can test that assumption usually pretty easily. And if it doesn't make a difference, I probably would still say I disagree, but it didn't matter.
Right now, how often do you get those computer files, John?
Occasionally, if we request it, but not often do they come in. And I don't request it all the time.
And we're not asking them to create something that doesn't already exist, right? They had to produce
They
a
have it,
computer
yeah.
analysis to provide the.
90% of them use a computer software called HydroCAD,
Right.
and I have HydroCAD. I have some other software programs too, and most of them aren't that expensive to buy. So if they use something else, I can usually figure it out. But the effort for me to enter the data is considerable versus just having the file.
Right.
And to be clear, this is May. So as John said, we don't ask for those computer
right.
files
Thank
all
you.
the time. But having this language in the regulation, if it were another very complex site, and we needed it, now if it's requested,
They have to give it to us.
the planning board, it's on the planning board, and if you choose to request it, it's in the regulations. And that's that will help us.
Peer
Yeah.
review suggests it
Takes
would
it
help
off
him
of
do
us,
his work. Exactly.
puts it on you.
I have had people that didn't want to give them to me. Not often, but that's happened too. Not necessarily in Hingham.
Instructor too, I guess, yeah.
So my assumption when they don't want to give it to you is that you gotta find something.
You probably want to see it more, right.
The next one on the next page actually is, and Mary already mentioned that, is the recording of the pipes to see the conditions. There's a section here that's the pre, and there's a section at the end that's the after, but that's in there as well as the note that has to go on the page for the cover sheet. I added in on page 21, this is an extension of the contours and some topographic data beyond the boundary. So many times you see, here's the property line and the contours are like right there. And, well, what happens just over? Does water flow into the site? Does water flow off of the site? It's not always obvious how far that is, where wetlands might be. Sometimes we might get a little pushback on that because of access rights and whatnot, but surveyors have certain access rights for property lines, so they can certainly pick up some elevations as they go. But I think that's a helpful thing in a bigger scheme of it. If it's not relevant and it's obvious that it's not an issue, then you can waive it. But I think it's good to have in there. The other one on that same page is that ever since I've been doing the reviews here, we've always viewed every subdivision as being subject to the stormwater management regulations. But under the DEP, if you read them, it says if it's a certain number of lots wouldn't require you to comply with it, which is probably most of the subdivisions here. But, that's statewide, in lots of parts of the state, there's a lot more undeveloped land to deal with than around here. Excuse me. The fire chief also added some comments in there, and Mary added those in from him. So you'll see some of those in there relative to the installation of hydrants, things of that nature. The next, I'm going to skip a few and go to the as-built, which again Mary talked about, but we have seen that when you do get the as-built, it doesn't look the same as what it was designed to be sometimes. And maybe the volume in the basin isn't quite what it should be, or it's not quite in the same spot. And like Mary said, if you can get that as-built plan ahead of them building all the houses, and they have to fix it, it's less of an issue, and they can get it done right the first time. So there's two sections we added in, which one is for like the drainage basins and subsurface, whatever drainage they put in, and the other one is the roadway. So the drainage basins would be before they pave. The roadway, when they put it to binder, you want to make sure that they have everything kind of right before they do the top course. So you don't have to cut after they've paved it.
Right.
Just seems to make sense. They have to pick up the data anyway. It gets used in the final as-built. It's a little bit extra effort to issue that plan, but it's all work that pretty much they'd have to do anyway. The only difference is when they do the final, you're going to get the change by like 1/10 of a foot, and you'll pick up some of those trees and landscape, things like that. But the basic infrastructure is already in. You know where it's got to be. It just seems to make sense.
Is this kind of requirement rather a norm in other towns? Or is this?
I pretty much took this out of another reg.
Yeah, so it's not outside.
It's not in all towns, no, but it's in a lot of towns.
Abnormal. It's
not abnormal, no. And it is exactly what we're having is a response to a problem that has occurred.
Right.
So it avoids that problem. It doesn't,
Yeah.
So that's, I think it makes a lot of sense.
If I may, so I've had two other engineers that do work in town call me to kind of walk through what the proposed revisions are, and we did. And both of them, when I brought up the interim as-built requirement, they said, oh yeah, lots of towns do that. I mean, it's actually easier and less expensive for everybody to fix the problems earlier than what we just went through when everything's done.
And then updating the final is straightforward.
So it was an interesting, I was glad to hear the reaction, but it didn't even surprise them because it's a common thing, so.
And
Good to get that before the pavement goes down.
Yes.
And
Any problems can be fixed before you move forward.
Oh, yeah. And when inspections are done, like under the regs, I do a lot of the inspections. I'm not a surveyor. I'm not out shooting grades. Does the stuff meet material specifications? We have people testing it, doing compaction. You can look at where things are. It's been staked out. So it should be in the right place. But that final, you can't just stand there and look and say, oh, yeah, I mean, you can tell, sometimes you can tell if something's off, way off, but you're not gonna be able to tell if something's a little off, especially when the whole site's cleared and it's all just dirt. You can't, we've added a couple things to the final as-built. One of them is to sort of have a full topography to show that they built the lots how they were supposed to as well, because a lot of the plans today, the grading is very specific to make it work.
That's true.
And if you don't build it the way they said, or the houses, they'll come in and they'll say, well, we're gonna put, 2,000 square foot houses, and then there's 5,000 square foot houses, so you gotta follow up to say you do what you say you're going to do, and include utilities and ties. That's one of the things that's always left off, is the ties. So we've added that in. And in the end of that section is the follow-up with the survey of the pipes with the TV to make sure that nothing was. It is possible, without touching something, that you could damage it just by heavy equipment running over it if it's in a shallow, location or whatever.
Before we jump to section 4, on page 12, I just want to add in page 12G. I want to add in section, it's 4C2 in there. Fill in that blank on page G.
Section.
No matter how much you look at something, you always find something. So, thank you.
Yeah, speaking of which, Mary, on page 31, that provision that we were just talking about with the as-built, the post-construction video camera, I was just comparing it to the language for the pre. And this is missing the part where it says, under new infrastructure not necessarily connected to the subdivision. So I would suggest that maybe it should be in there. If you look on page 19, just quick.
Yeah, I was just trying to find it.
Sorry, I know, it's a little bit.
So, within the limit of work, including those in existing public or private way.
Will be crossed by or under new infrastructure. I think it's supposed to be, but not necessarily connected to the subdivision. That's what it says on page 19.
But not, okay, it's missing a necessarily. Okay. Got it.
Thanks.
Any others, or?
Nope.
Good? All right. Section 4. So, again, there's more on the private local street, which we've talked about, and it was in there. Street's consistent with all the other names as far as the subdivision instead of roadway. That's why that mostly changed, but,
And to be consistent with table 1.
and to be consistent with table 1, which has also been updated, we'll get to. So, I mean, I think that we talked about. The Appendix D, which you see and is now in the end, because it's an appendix, it shouldn't be right in the middle of the regs. And that's the fire department access section. So the next bigger one is on page 33. And again, this is something that's pretty much done every subdivision, but there's nothing formal to say what you have to do. So now, this is about site distance, so this adds in some documents, and this is actually directly from Jeff Durr, because I'm not a traffic engineer, and he wrote this for another town that had a section like this, but he updated it to the more current regulations. So, again, I copied that pretty much directly without having to ask him on this one specifically, because it's the exact same thing. But I think that's a helpful thing. It should be on the plans, and it's, instead of having to ask for it every time, and instead of having to discuss it every time whether it meets it, here you have it.
And the board, you should find this language familiar too from other applications like the daycare on Abington Street. Not a subdivision, but we had these same kinds of conversations. It's pretty standard language.
Then the table has been updated to be consistent with the width of the berm, the depth of compaction. So the depth of compaction on this was 6 inches, but in section 5, it was 8 inches. So we switched it. Section 5 is 20, with its 24 inches of gravel, it's 8 inches. With the material, with the equipment they have today, they could probably get it with more than 8 inches. But the reason you have it a little thinner is so that they can't hide a rock in it.
Spoken from experience, I suspect.
Yeah.
And can we just talk about the change in the width of the traveled road too?
And that's the fire department
That's
minimum.
fire, right? Okay,
It's
that's
the
what I thought.
minimum of 20, so it used to be narrower, but there's nothing narrower anymore. That's
That's what I
sort of
thought.
fire code, and we don't want to be foul of that.
And that's been a standard, like, kind of conflict.
Yeah, right.
Police
Every
chief always
time
wants
say, well, we only
24.
require this, but the police, I mean, the fire, yeah, so this is
Right.
good.
Well, police chief will tell you 24,
That's right,
right?
every time.
Yeah.
The applicant wants 10,
Right.
and fire wants 20. So,
All right, that's good,
It's good to have one uniform one.
yeah.
There's a small clarification on 35 about intersecting streets, so that it's clear that it's on either side, not, sometimes people will argue on that one. A little clarification on dead-end streets, too, on that page.
Yeah.
The next one on page 37, this comes up, the town has a 10-year storm basis for street drains, but you will see on occasion and that people will try to catch water in a catch basin and run it opposite the slope of the road, so like the road will crown like this, and they'll put a pair of catch basins here and run them back this way. So if they do that, you have to design that set to catch whatever the hydrology model said, which is a 100-year storm. So you have to now analyze a larger storm to make it consistent. I write this comment all the time, but now it's like at least a little bit more enforcement
Yeah.
there. Although it's common sense, you can't say water's going here if you haven't designed to move it, but I just added it into sort of belt and suspenders. On page 39, under the private local streets, this is where you let the stormwater management structure be in an easement, not on its own lot, as long as the easement doesn't result in extra lot area that would create more lots than you would otherwise have.
as a side note on that, we're gonna have to look at the zoning bylaw and just see if this is consistent with that. We may be triggering under that special condition of what can be counted towards minimum lot area. We may have to add this in there, but that will be in another couple months. So.
All right. We've added a couple things that just, as you go through bounds on, if there is an open space project, the bounds prior to the release of the lot, so we don't end up with that headache.
This one on page 40 under J, if I could just jump in.
Yeah.
Was just put in kind of as a guidance. The board does spend a good amount of time talking about this with projects, but we didn't, it just really comes right out and says that the board encourages preservation areas that are deed restricted to help retain the natural features.
I think that's good.
There's a few other just sort of clarification things from fire. On page 42, the Hingham Municipal Light Plant did review and added a bunch of information in there, which is helpful. And they've, clarified the street light requirements, and, I mean, we had like sodium vapor lights, they use LEDs, it just, all of those things are good and make sense to get done. I added in that soil testing should be witnessed. There was not a requirement for that. That's better for everyone, actually. Then there's no questions.
Yep.
It's just, you know. We also added the path, if there's ever footpaths, whatever, construct them prior to the release of the abutting lot so that they know what they're getting. All right, that's section 4. So section 5, there aren't too many. There's a little bit on the granite curbing on the private local streets. There's a bit on electric, and I think the fire might have added a little bit in here too.
And some HDPE
Yeah, HDPE,
corrections or
curbing,
edits.
yeah, just minor edits.
The board did a pretty thorough revision of section 5 back in 2014. So there's not a ton of changes in this.
So the the bigger ones, this one's not that big, but the street trees situation, what it had been the case is that there was a 10-foot easement, and that's now not necessarily called an easement, it's just where the trees should be planted. So they're not within the right-of-way. If you put them in the right-of-way, they're gonna be in conflict with all sorts of utilities, because everything's buried in the shoulders.
That's right.
So you have to put them outside the right-of-way, but where you put them, you have a 10-foot strip, and they should be within that area. And that sort of defines how that works out. Bounds and monuments, so granite, I'm sorry,
That's
92.
92. is
Thank you.
the-
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
So all public, any road that could be accepted by the town would have granite Hingham Highway bound monuments. Private local streets can use the concrete bounds, is what we think makes sense, because that's, the town's never gonna own that. You don't wanna confuse it by putting a granite Hingham Highway bound on a private local street either. So there's a little clarification on where they have to be on that one.
Do we want to change this to say street instead of roadways?
Yeah,
then?
that should say street.
And some of these edits for bounds come from Randy Sylvester at DPW, made some comments on bounds. Interestingly, people pulled the bounds out,
Yeah, they like the granite.
but even the iron pins, remember at that other
Oh,
project?
yeah.
Now, sometimes if granite isn't required, sometimes a piece of rebar is acceptable depending on the location. And we actually had one project recently where it was in, we all saw it, Randy GPS'd it, and we were out there maybe a month or two later,
Gone.
and it was gone. Someone must have pulled it up.
They're
and,
not
like,
easy either to pull
sold
out.
it.
Pulled it out.
They're not, it was an iron, like a rebar. They're not easy to pull out because they're ribbed, and once they've been in for a little while,
It
They
goes
get
around it,
kind
yeah.
of welded in there.
Yeah.
they're tough.
So,
But
yeah.
somebody was able to do
Somebody
it.
did that.
Somebody was committed to the effort, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah. They're generally long, so. So now we're into section 6. And the biggest one here is what's called a construction plan. That's on page 95. Basically, the construction plan is, I'm going to say, it's not an exact equivalent, but it's similar to the stormwater pollution prevention plan, which most times they have to do. There isn't any sort of requirement, unless it's a condition, that they file it with the board or anyone. It's an EPA requirement. They file it with the EPA, keep it on site, unless somebody complains. There is really, there's no rule unless you put it in the conditions. So this section has been added in, and I'll admit this one's been hijacked from another reg too, a few edits to it, but it essentially takes the SWIP plan and sort of documents it as a requirement with, maybe a few other things that have been added in, just, they might go
And
above that.
this is consistent with the requirements for the EPA as well?
Pretty much, yeah. It's not exact, but it sort of covers the same sort of things. The EPA SWIP has a lot of different things that are would be added to this, but this gives you sort of a working construction plan. Where are you putting the stockpile?
So this is less than.
It's less than in some ways, and it might be a little bit more in other ways. It might be a little more on some of the drainage requirements and maybe a little less on like how are you storing your, your fuel oil or your pesticide or whatever. Do you have a contain, some of those. If they're into it, they have to do the SWIP anyway, but this sort of gives them some marching orders as to what we want to see on a plan. And I never get one that has everything on it. This is a little better because now it's pretty well documented. What you get with the SWIP is somebody will go through the form and just fill all this stuff out, but they won't draw it. Now, this is a plan, not a report. So they have to now put it on the plan and how they're going to do it, which I think is important. We haven't had big problems with that, but plenty of towns I've worked in have had problems with, and we're getting into some sites that don't have as good a soils as some others. If you have all gravel, it's not usually a problem, but if you have poorer soil conditions, it's not so easy. It also includes hours of operation, all that type of thing you typically put in as conditions. So now it's makes your conditions easier rather than having to take them in every time. I mean, that's a pretty big section, so if you have any questions and.
Yeah.
This also provides a little more guidance on pre-construction meetings. The board will recall that's kind of a standard condition that we place. Some projects, we have one pre-construction meeting. We have another recently approved subdivision that we've had several pre-construction meetings on. But having some of the requirements and the regulations saying, before we even have the pre-construction meeting, all staking of the roadway center line, limit of work, and sediment control shall be marked in the field. Having that in the regulation is very helpful because it's efficient and it just lays out clearly ahead of time for everybody. Here's what we're all expecting. And it cuts down on the conditions per se that we always have to wordsmith.
And you would think that like staking the road would make sense. They're gonna have to stake it too, but you'd be amazed. It's like, it isn't always there. And you kind of need that to know where you are.
Yeah, it's, for us, we go out to a site to inspect it and you get there and nothing's ready. It just wastes everybody's time. And the builders, they want to keep moving. Time is money. Staff, we want to keep moving. We want to help our customers keep moving. So that's the impetus for some of that.
And I think then, if there's no questions, the last thing is we added a checklist for the definitive plan applications, which, goes through basically the submittal requirements and, what you have to do. It's, it's sort of a simple list, but you have all the information there, the general stuff. Plans are stamped,
Here's one new addition that, one new addition that John hasn't seen yet even. So this board, and this is good for you to think about, almost at the bottom in bold. Do not, we say that you have to show all contiguous lots in common beneficial ownership with land that's subject to the plan, right? But what the board has been saying of late is, that's fine, but we don't want to see full, bounds of any other properties. So one of the things that I added on here is, do something that you guys always say, do not show the entirety of any parcels except those that are the subject of the application or in common beneficial ownership. And we added that on the checklist. There's also similar language back in the Form A section. It was already there, but it's just kind of in bold. That may assist you.
So, and I think that's pretty much what I have.
Okay. Can I ask a question? Is that okay, Gordon?
Of course.
Back on page 99, number 33. I'm just wondering, Is it possible, so this contemplates no building permit for new dwelling units in 2 different places, and I'm wondering if a building permit could be issued for another type of use other than dwelling? Like, do we need to make that broader, or is that on purpose that we're making it dwelling? Could there be a commercial or a retail use in a subdivision that we would be missing?
I guess you could have a
rather than
commercial,
here?
I guess you could have a commercial subdivision, that there aren't many, maybe it just should just say no building permit.
Yeah,
If it,
shall be granted.
Yeah, that's a good, no, that's a
That
good
okay?
point, yeah.
I think that's broader.
Yeah, some of the conditions that the board put on the Patterson Pond subdivision about the phasing, and you can't have a building permit until you hit this benchmark. You know, some of that language, we built into here, some of those safeguards.
Yeah.
I was just offer a couple comments. I like the pre-construction requirements. I think that's a good way to do it. As you said, the meetings become standard operating procedure, so we might as well have that in our rules and regs. I like the site distance minimum requirement, because we're always conditioning that. So that's a good addition to it. The interim as-built is great. We're always asking for that to begin with, and I like the checklist for the Form As and the Form Cs. You know, you can go through with the applicants and say, you got this, you got it, opposed to you having to chase them down.
Right.
So I think these changes are looking good.
You typically are a traffic cop on that stuff as it is, but, you know, without the checklists, you're going back and forth with them to try to get that.
Oh, yeah, sometimes it takes like several times to just get something simple,
Right.
which should be nothing to do, but where's a benchmark, for example?
And usually we're coming into meetings and you're still trying to chase that stuff down, you know?
Yeah.
So now you
Right.
can, they know ahead of time what they.
Other thoughts or comments? Can't wait for the comprehensive review.
No, I think this is great. I think the fact that you're addressing, you know, the purposes that you outlined at the beginning of the meeting, the lessons we've learned, the challenges that you experience in the field that we're not party to, it's important for us to hear about it and to back you up by having it in our regulations, so that, you know, when you're out there meeting with these folks, that you can make sure it's held to the standard that we all expect when we issue these permits. So to have the appropriate language in our regs to back you up makes a
Well,
lot
and
of
we'll
sense.
limit the number of conditions that we have to impose each time and all
Right.
that.
Right.
It's just,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah,
cleaner
so
for,
thank
cleaner
you.
for the applicants as well.
And the subdivision apps, you know, they kind of ebb and flow, you know, like when I first was on the board, we had a lot of subdivision apps. And then when the economy kind of turned down, they faded off significantly. And now they're picking back up, so it's good to have, to look at our rules and regs, revise them now. I think there will be an increase of them going forward.
Indeed.
So thank you.
Thank you. Public comments for our patient guests? I do.
Yeah.
Patch. My concern is, having sat in on a bunch of the meetings of the board, is the Form A stuff. And just like Billy was saying, how, you know, the subdivisions are picking up. Well, what's happening is the reality is the amount of land that's available for, meaty
Scale.
subdivision is decreasing. So what's happening is the developers are going in and looking to do the Form As. And, it's with the Form As, I've looked at a lot of different towns, what they've done, and I understand, there's a certain limit of information that you guys want to have to deal with, but there's a lot of nuances with Form As, and what the developers are trying to do is, I think, slide by a lot of get past a lot of those nuances. And, looking on the checklist, for example, a lot of other towns, what they do is they actually provide boxes and say, under reason for you believe you're entitled to the Form A, they actually provide like boxes before, and then they'll say other. So in other words, they'll say, is this, they'll do the 81L, is this a public way? blah, 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 that box, okay? Is this a private way, in existence prior to the adoption of subdivision control law, which I think should, it should specifically say, in Hingham, we adopted in March, whatever it was, 6 of 1941, whatever. I don't know, just put it right out there and get this information, for you, because these are the types of things you guys need to know in order to make those determinations. So for example, if it's a subdivision, if the way is a subdivision way that's been approved under subdivision control law, my understanding is if the road is not complete and there's no performance guarantee in place, technically you cannot grant the Form A, because the whole point of that exception on 81L is it's allowed because there's a guarantee in place to construct the road. And that's the whole idea of the Form A, is you're not concerned about the frontage, the access, because it's either in existence as a public way, which then the town has responsibility for, or it's subdivision road that you guys has been approved in the past. But then you have to go look to see whether or not it's been completed, evidence of completion, because if it hasn't been completed, again, unless there's a performance guarantee in place, you're not supposed to allow the Form A. And then again, with the third category there, for example, with a way in existence prior to the adoption of subdivision control law, evidence of that, okay, then you guys are supposed to make a determination about whether or not the way, the planning board is supposed to make a determination whether the way is adequate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you have one of these questions about how much information can you really ask of the applicant? And I think you're within your rights to ask for quite a bit of information from them, because otherwise you're making a decision pretty much out of ignorance on a lot of issues. So, for example, in addition, they've grafted on to the Form A, the NR, the vital access standard. And so if you have, and I can think of a piece of property, I think on Summer Street, that has a pond in front of it that came before this board several years ago, and the people were looking for a Form A, and basically what they had is a common driveway. And my understanding of the case law is, in that situation, if you don't have the vital access, if you have a pond that prevents actual access in that, you don't have the vital access aspect of it. And so, I guess the question is, as part of the application, not necessarily the plan, but as part of the application, would it be appropriate to ask the applicant to provide you a picture of the way, the length of the way for the linear frontage of what you're claiming is the linear frontage of the property, showing the property? Because I've always struggled with that. How do you actually make that determination if you have no idea? Because from the plan, you're not seeing what's really there in terms of any obstruction, the vital access. So it's one of those problems that the court has grafted onto this process. But then, how do you guys actually make that determination without sufficient information? So I think that's another thing that you should be thinking about asking for from the developers or anybody who's looking for a May. Another issue is you have a lot of times you have people coming in with, they'll show a house lot or show a lot that does not have the current linear frontage required by the zoning district. So I would think the application would note that if you don't have that, then what's the basis for your claim that you're grandfathered in to, or essentially zoning, you're pre-existing non-conforming? Because again, if they don't have that, then you can't give them the Form A. It's just, there's a lot of, and I understand, I'm sure Mary's like, how much information can we get? But again, I don't think, I've seen a lot of other applications from other towns. They ask for a ton of information, not necessarily on the plan itself, but essentially so that you can make these intelligent decisions. And where everybody's trying to make lemonade out of lemons here, so to speak, by reconfiguring these lots and so forth. I think, at this point, you guys really should be asking for that type of information. I'd be willing. I know it doesn't sound like you guys are going to be voting on this tonight, but I wasn't quite sure where you guys stood in this process, so that I blame myself about that. But I'd be more than willing, within like a week to, provide you with something, an additional list of stuff that you guys can think about asking for. And what it does is just makes your job easier, really, because now you're getting all the information you need to make an intelligent, informed decision. Because, an improperly created Form A lot can cause just as many problems, traffic-wise, et cetera, as, a imperfect subdivision road. So that's sort of where my concern is now. Thanks.
Well, and maybe that fits in the sort of the broader revisions that we're going to be doing next as well, right? If we want to look at additional applications. But
Yeah, if the board thought that made sense and you wanted to say, have me do a deeper dive on it and work with Mr. Patch and really do a thorough analysis of our application as part of the springtime revisions, I could do that. I will say that I didn't really look at modifying the application form, but I would probably want to look at a couple different towns and then, of course, talk to council about that and get her advice too.
I definitely like, the point about applicants talking through the legal requirements of the Form A. Sometimes we look at
we're deciding
looking
on
at
the
the form,
fly.
okay,
Yeah.
where's your front edge, where's the access, so I definitely think the legal points are very important for the applicant to go over, during their presentation, but also when they're
I like the checkbox idea,
81, yeah, I
Yep.
do.
but it
And you
might
say
take
there
me
were
more than a
examples of
week to
that
kind of get
out
into
there.
it.
And they comply with 81L, so. That's a
So
good
just,
suggestion.
I
good
may not, I
suggestion.
may not hold up these changes, that's all, that's my only suggestion,
Yeah,
because I think
yeah.
we
I
should,
agree.
I'd like to take some time on that.
your job easier.
Yeah.
I hear you.
If we know what we're looking at, yeah.
The decision
Yep.
Yeah.
It would certainly help me.
Yep,
Be sure.
so, I just, and I won't prejudge, I'm open to thoughts on whether or not, you guys have done a ton of work on all of this, and we have had other conversations with the board on this. The question is, do you want to wait for Gary and Judy to be here to approve these changes to the rules and regs as we've discussed and with the edits that we had tonight, or do you want to vote on it tonight?
I'm okay voting on it unless one of our two colleagues they will ask us to abstain or wait. Because these changes are, they're substantive, but they're more procedural in nature too, in terms of.
Exactly. Well,
And then we can kind of keep adding to it. Did either of those two ask to wait?
no, they did not, no.
I'm comfortable moving forward too, and I don't feel like either of them had a lot of objections at the August meeting, and Mary, have you heard from them that they?
I haven't, and they were at the workshop meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
And as you guys have described, virtually all of these changes are things that we've all witnessed or experienced or had to deal with,
Right.
in the past. There's nothing new in here. so-
Controversial, right.
I think if one of them had a very strong feeling about something, we could always make a motion to reconsider it.
Right.
Yep.
Or if they wanted more of something, we have another bite at the apple in the spring when we're doing the
Yeah.
broader revisions.
I'd rather have these done in case applications come in.
I hear you.
All right, other than that, then.
With
A
that,
motion?
can I get a motion to,
I'd make a motion, we act favorably on proposed revisions to the planning board rules and regulations adopted under the subdivision control law.
Second.
all in favor?
Oh, wait, Mary.
As presented
As presented
and
and edited.
revised tonight.
Yes.
So moved.
So seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you both.
Great work, my goodness.
Thank you.
Good work, Mary. John, thank you.
And we'll keep it moving, we'll keep going on, improving.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. We are gonna be doing another subdivision reg revision, and this will be in it, so we'll have to spend some time looking at that, and if it's okay with the board, I'll take Mr. Patch up on his offer to
Absolutely.
Yeah.
to get
no,
some
I think that,
input on that. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
Do we have minutes?
We have minutes, but we don't have the proper bodies here to vote on them. Okay, sadly.
The improper bodies will not vote. So, I think so. Any other?
I think you're done,
Business.
if you choose to be.
And we're back on 24.
Back on the 24th.
7 o'clock. They'll really start because we just voted on those.
But it will probably be a late end.
But it'll be a late.
Another good reason to vote. on it.
Exactly.
Don't really start.
So I think I have to leave now to make it here by 7 o'clock on the 24th. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Mary, do you want to?